Welcome everyone to the Xillio webinar, and this time about unlocking the power of Microsoft 365. So say you have done your feasibility study with Rob, or you have migrated into Microsoft 365, rebuilt your processes, set up your records management, but then you want to keep it optimized, want to make sure of good adoption. So how do you do that? Well, we thought about that as well, and we came up with Content Care. Part of it is a product, but it's also services around it, right? You also need to configure the dashboards, do some interpretations. We can advise on direction to go. We look closely at the roadmap of Microsoft 365 and can help you drive the best value from innovations that are happening. Then we go into the solution architecture. Jorn will give an overview of that.
So during a migration, as has been mentioned before, we collect some insights of your source system, where we collect the amount of files, the sizes, how long the file paths are. We collect a lot of data. So it would be a shame to let all of that go to waste once you migrate into your SharePoint environment. So we came up with a way to keep building on this information and really stay on top of the game for SharePoint. So when you use SharePoint or when an application uses SharePoint, it interacts with it, of course, and SharePoint creates a whole bunch of audit logs, which is basically all the operations that are performed, and it will be nicely collected in a huge set of audit logs, which we can use and interpret, which is what we for Xillio Content Care are doing. So we're loading all of it, processing it into different sections. So we have a specific business rules, which filter out compliance and security related audit logs. We filter out content management and content growth audit logs, and adoption and use logs. And we process these and calculate all different kinds of metrics, and we write these into a database which can be used by our dashboards. And these dashboards can then, of course, be used by your users. But of course, with all this data, all these logs, it might be quite sensitive information. Not everyone should be able to see it. That's why we decided to host Content Care inside of your own M365 tenant, so no one has access but you. Then I'd like to give it to Fungai for a real demo about the system.
So we will be showing you 4 main dashboards today that have to do with Content Care. The first one is the overview, which is basically a visual summary of some of the key metrics that we generate from the SharePoint environment. So for example, in the top right corner, you can see the number of unique contributors, which reflects how many different individuals are actively participating in content creation and collaboration. A high number of unique contributors means that there's high engagement, which often leads to effective utilization of SharePoint. And it also means that there is more diverse perspective and ideas that are being shared, which potentially improves the quality and the relevance of the content as well. So in the end, we can measure things like the level of engagement and the content quality based on this metric. We can also see the number of files with unique contributors, which measures the extent to which different individuals are contributing to the shared content. In this case, we can see a pretty large disparity between the files with multiple contributors and files with single contributors. And this tells us that over the last 8 weeks, which is the period for which we collected this data, there wasn't a lot of collaboration going on. But maybe you could attribute that to the summer holidays, seeing as we are still in August. So maybe the fact that people were in and out of the office meant that there was a reduction in the level of collaboration in SharePoint. You can also see from a security perspective the number of files that have been flagged for malware detection. And this allows us to assess and take appropriate actions to prevent security breaches. In this particular case, there's only one file that's been flagged for malware detection. And whilst you want it to be 0, 1 is pretty good. Monitoring these flags is good because it ensures compliance with data protection, and it also demonstrates your commitment to maintaining a secure digital environment. If this number were higher than 1, then you might want to take a look at your allocation of cybersecurity resources and address the malware-related issues. This is just an overview. We'll move on to something more specific, such as user adoption, which allows us to identify areas of high and low user adoption so that you can tailor your adoption strategies accordingly. Once again, in the top right corner, you can see some of the key metrics, such as the number of unique users accessing content, which helps us to measure user engagement. And we could generate visualizations that show unique users accessing content over time in order to create or to show a trend of user adoption over the last 6 months to a year, for example. And we can also see the number of unique users modifying content, which speaks to collaboration and engagement. We could gauge the popularity and relevance of different content and how effective it is in promoting teamwork and knowledge sharing. And we could also see how many users are uploading content, which is a measure of user contribution to the environment. Just below that, we have the activity distribution, which shows us how evenly the activities are distributed. And this gives us a peek into how effectively SharePoint is being used. So for example, in this visualization, we can see that downloaded files make up the majority of file-related activities over the last 8 weeks with 43.65%. And already this raises an eyebrow because it should be lower than that. We know that SharePoint allows you to create, edit, and share content without having to download the file. So from a data compliance or security perspective, it might be worth investigating why this is the case. And you might find that maybe it's so high because some users don't understand how to share content on the platform, so they're downloading it and then sharing it over emails or Teams. In that case, it would present an opportunity for training. We can also see the number of active unique users per day, and this helps us to make data-driven decisions with regards to resource planning, for example. So if we have a high number of active unique users per day, we might want to increase our server resources to improve the user experience. If we have a low number of active unique users per day, we might want to downgrade our server resources and save money. We could also use this for marketing purposes and target our communication. So for example, we noticed that in this particular visualization, Tuesdays and Thursdays were the days with the highest unique active usage per day. So that would be an opportunity for the organization to target their communication on those same days in order to reach a wider audience and increase the effectiveness of their communication strategy. This is just daily active usage, but we could drill down to the hour, which would be valuable for companies that maybe have locations in different time zones and are interested in seeing which country offices are responsible for the highest hourly active usage, and they want to tailor their resource planning accordingly. We can also see the activity trend, which works hand in hand with activity distribution, because activity distribution basically told us that downloaded files were the majority of the file and page activities over the last 8 weeks. The activity trend shows us how those downloads are spread out across different days. If we were to isolate the downloaded files, we can see that there was this huge spike in downloaded files from the 12th of July to the 15th of July. Already we can begin to eliminate maybe our earlier assumption that it could be because users don't understand how to share content. The activity trend is telling us that this is probably a number of users that are downloading this high volume of files for a very specific reason. And once again, from a data compliance or security perspective, we might be interested in finding out why this is the case. And that's where the number of unique users performing an operation comes in. Because once again, if we isolate the downloaded files and we target the same date where we saw the spike, which was the 14th of July, we can see that we only have 20 unique users who performed that operation on that day. And even though we aren't showing it in this particular visualization, we know exactly who these users are, and we can already begin to target sort of some research or some kind of investigation into seeing why this is happening. If there is a potential threat to our data, if our data is not secure. This is, in a nutshell, maybe an example of the power that Content Care provides, is that within minutes, we were able to identify a potential threat to our data. We're able to narrow it down to a list of 20 potential users. And in another 5 minutes, we could narrow it down to specific individuals. And we can make data-driven decisions that protect our SharePoint environment. So this is a bit about user adoption. We can also drill down these visualizations to a site level. For the purposes of privacy, we anonymized the site names and the usernames. So if we pick a random site and apply the changes, we can see the user adoption metrics for this particular site, which means that you can tailor your user adoption strategies at a site level. And if need be, you could even tailor it down to an individual level. So that's just some of the insight into the granularity and how far down we can go. Moving on to content growth. From here, we can drill down into how well the content has grown over time. Once again, in the top right-hand corner, you can see the key metrics for content growth. We also have a visualization of the most active users, and these are most likely the same people that are driving content growth in SharePoint. The top 10 users are people who probably have a good understanding of how SharePoint works, and this allows us to identify power users who can then help with SharePoint training or promote user adoption for the rest of the organization. Once again, for the purposes of privacy, we anonymized these users, but the point is to demonstrate the functionality. So for example, if we wanted to know how we can improve the SharePoint environment, we might start by consulting this particular user, because we can see that they are by far the most active user in the organization as a whole. But as I mentioned earlier, we could also drill down to a specific site and apply what we see to a specific site and take a look at the modification, access, and deletion frequencies. That's a bit about content growth. Moving on to collaboration efficiency. This is basically a number of different visualizations that speak to how well our users are collaborating inside of SharePoint. We have an example there of a visualization that shows the files with multiple contributors against files with single contributors, and maybe that actually makes it more apparent that we have a collaboration issue, because we shouldn't have 99% of the files with a single contributor. We should see a little bit more even distribution there between the two variables. We can also show the frequent names of files that are being modified. So this is where most of the collaboration is taking place. And maybe we can identify this as popular content. And if we need to improve the user engagement or the collaboration, we could try to replicate the format of this content across the rest of the environment so that people are more likely to engage with it. So that is, in a nutshell, the demo that we had for you today. Thank you.